The helicopter blades cut through the thick Afghan night as Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison adjusted his night vision goggles. His team of Navy SEALs sat in tense silence, each man lost in his own pre-mission ritual. They had done this hundreds of times before, but tonight felt different. Tonight they were getting a new asset and nobody knew what to expect. The briefing had been strange from the start. Captain Richards had walked into the room with an unusual expression, something between respect and warning. He had told them about their new handler, someone with a perfect record, someone who had never lost a team. But he had refused to give them a name, only a call sign. Falcon Jake had laughed at first. The guys had made jokes, assuming it was some desk officer who had earned a cool name through politics rather than action. They had seen it before. People with impressive call signs who had never seen real combat. But Richards had not smiled. Instead, he had looked each of them in the eye and said something that stuck with Jake even now. As the helicopter descended toward the landing zone, "This person will keep you alive. Listen to every word, follow every instruction, and you will come home. Ignore the guidance and you are on your own." The helicopter touched down with a soft thud, and the team moved out quickly, weapons ready, eyes scanning the darkness. They were 3 miles from the target, a compound where intelligence suggested a high-value target was hiding. The mission was simple on paper: get in, extract or eliminate the target, get out. But nothing was ever simple in the field. Jake's radio crackled to life. The voice that came through was calm, measured, and undeniably female. "Falcon to ground team, I have you on visual. Welcome to my playground." Several of the SEALs exchanged glances. A woman. Their handler was a woman. Jake could almost feel the shift in attitude among some of his men. He had served with female soldiers before, respected many of them. But he knew not everyone on his team felt the same way. Petty Officer Derek Mason in particular had made his views clear many times in the past. "Ground team to Falcon, we copy," Jake responded, keeping his voice professional, requesting route guidance to objective. There was a brief pause, then Falcon's voice returned. "Negative on the planned route. I am seeing heat signatures indicating patrol patterns that do not match your briefing. Someone knew you were coming or you walked into a coincidence. Either way, the front door is closed." Jake felt his jaw tighten. They had planned this mission for 2 weeks. The route had been carefully calculated based on satellite imagery and human intelligence. Changing it now, based on the word of someone sitting in an air-conditioned room somewhere, possibly thousands of miles away, went against his instincts. "Falcon, our route was cleared by," Jake started. But the voice cut him off. "By people who are not looking at what I am looking at right now," Falcon said, her tone still calm but with an edge of authority. "Lieutenant Commander, I have thermal imaging showing 15 hostiles in positions along your planned approach. They are spaced at intervals that suggest defensive positioning, not random patrol. You have approximately 4 minutes before one of those patrols reaches a position where they will spot your team." Jake looked at his men. Some looked skeptical, others concerned. Derek shook his head slightly, his opinion clear. But Jake had not survived 12 years in the SEALs by ignoring good intelligence, regardless of where it came from. "What do you suggest?" he asked. "Head northeast, bearing 045. There is a dried riverbed that will provide cover and concealment. It adds 12 minutes to your approach, but it bypasses all current hostile positions. I will guide you around any patrols." Jake made the decision quickly. "Team, we are adjusting route. Northeast, bearing 045. Stay tight and stay quiet." As they moved through the darkness, Falcon's voice provided constant updates. She warned them of loose rocks that would make noise, pointed out areas where the ground was too soft and would leave tracks, and twice directed them to stop and wait as patrols passed nearby. Each time her guidance was perfect. The patrols appeared exactly when and where she said they would. Despite himself, Jake was impressed. Whoever Falcon was, she knew her job. The thermal imaging and real-time battlefield awareness she provided was beyond anything he had experienced before. It was like having eyes everywhere, seeing everything, anticipating every danger. They reached the dried riverbed without incident and followed it toward the compound. The terrain was rough, filled with rocks and thorny bushes that grabbed at their gear. But it was exactly as Falcon had described, and it kept them hidden from sight. "Ground team, hold position," Falcon's voice commanded suddenly. "You have a vehicle approaching from the west. 2 hostiles inside. They are not following any patrol pattern. This is a random check or a supply run." The SEALs dropped into defensive positions, weapons trained in the direction Falcon had indicated. Sure enough, 30 seconds later, the faint sound of an engine reached their ears. A battered truck appeared on the ridge above them, headlights off, moving slowly. "They have not seen you," Falcon said quietly. "Remain still. They are scanning, but the riverbed is deep enough to hide your heat signatures from their angle." The truck stopped. Jake could hear voices speaking in Pashto. His finger moved to the trigger. If they were discovered now, the entire mission would be compromised. But Falcon's voice remained calm in his ear. "Hold. They are discussing the best route back to the compound. One of them wants to use the riverbed because the road is in poor condition. The other is arguing that it is too dark and dangerous. Wait." The voices continued for what felt like hours but was probably less than 2 minutes. Then the truck's engine roared to life again and the vehicle moved away, choosing the road instead of the riverbed. "Clear," Falcon said. "Continue on your current path. You are 7 minutes from the objective." As they moved forward again, Derek leaned close to Jake and whispered. She understood what they were saying. "She speaks Pashto," Jake nodded. That detail had not been lost on him either. Falcon was not just reading thermal scans and predicting patrol patterns. She was listening to enemy communications, understanding their language and providing real-time translation. This was not standard operating procedure for handlers. This was something else entirely. The compound came into view ahead of them, a cluster of mud brick buildings surrounded by a low wall. Lights glowed from several windows and the shadows of guards were visible moving along the perimeter. "Falcon to ground team," the voice said. "Your target is in the northwest building, 2nd floor. But we have a problem. The thermal imaging shows 23 hostiles in and around the compound. Your briefing said to expect 12. Someone has reinforced this position." Jake processed this information quickly. More than double the expected enemy force changed everything about this mission. They would need to adjust tactics, possibly call for additional support, or even abort and wait for better conditions. Before he could respond, Falcon spoke again. "I am sending updated building layouts to your tablets now. I have identified 3 possible entry points and 4 extraction routes based on current enemy positions. But Lieutenant Commander, I need you to trust me on this. What I'm about to propose will sound wrong, but it is your best chance of success." Jake looked at the glowing screen of his tactical tablet, watching as new information populated the display. His team gathered around, studying the intelligence Falcon was providing. Whatever she was about to suggest, they were going to need every advantage they could get. Jake stared at the tactical tablet, trying to process what Falcon was suggesting. The plan displayed on the screen went against every tactical principle he had learned in his career. Instead of using stealth and surprise to infiltrate the compound quietly, Falcon was proposing they create a deliberate distraction on the south side, while the main team entered from the north. "You want us to announce our presence?" Derek said, his voice thick with disbelief. "That is suicide." "Not announce," Falcon corrected calmly. "Misdirect. The enemy has reinforced this position because they expect an attack. They are prepared for a covert infiltration. What they are not prepared for is aggression from an unexpected direction." Jake studied the thermal images Falcon was streaming to his tablet. She was right about the defensive posture. The guards were concentrated around the most logical entry points, and their patrol patterns suggested they were actively hunting for infiltrators rather than conducting routine security checks. "Walk me through it," Jake said, making his decision to at least hear the full plan. "You split your team," Falcon began. 3 men create noise on the south wall using flashbangs and suppressed fire at shadows. Not enough to be a real assault, just enough to draw attention. The hostiles will assume it is a probing attack or a diversion for an entry point they have not secured. They will shift personnel to investigate and reinforce that area. While they are looking south, the rest of us enter from the north," Jake finished, seeing the logic now. "Exactly, but timing is critical. The diversion team initiates at my mark, holds position for exactly 45 seconds, then withdraws to the rally point. That 45-second window is when the main team moves. Any longer and the enemy will realize it is a feint. Any shorter and not enough guards will reposition." Jake looked at his men. He could see the doubt on their faces, but he could also see they understood the tactical logic. Sometimes the best way to be sneaky was to make some noise somewhere else. "Who did you serve with?" Jake asked suddenly. "Before becoming a handler, I mean." There was a long pause on the radio. "That information is classified, Lieutenant Commander. What matters right now is getting you and your team home safely with your objective complete. The non-answer told Jake plenty. Falcon had field experience, probably extensive field experience. The way she understood tactics, the way she anticipated enemy responses, the calm in her voice even while describing dangerous maneuvers. These were not traits learned from a desk. All right, we do it your way, Jake decided. Martinez, Chen, Stevens, you three are the diversion team. The rest with me on primary entry. The team split up and moved into position. Falcon continued providing updates, guiding each element around patrol routes and calling out enemy positions with precision that bordered on supernatural. Jake began to understand why Richards had spoken about Falcon with such respect. This was not just competence. This was mastery. Diversion team in position, Martinez reported quietly. Main team ready, Jake added. Stand by, Falcon said. Jake could hear a new intensity in her voice now, a focus that suggested she was tracking multiple elements simultaneously. Hostiles are completing a guard change at the north wall. Wait for it. Wait for it. Diversion team, initiate now. The night exploded with sound. Flashbangs detonated along the south wall, their brilliant light painting the compound in stark relief. Martinez and his team fired controlled bursts at the buildings, aiming high deliberately to avoid causing casualties that would escalate the situation unnecessarily. The response was immediate. Jake watched through his night vision as thermal signatures rushed toward the south wall. Guards shouted commands in Pashto and weapons fire answered Martinez's team. Main team, move now, Falcon commanded. You have 45 seconds. Jake and his 4 remaining men sprinted toward the north wall. The sounds of combat behind them covered any noise they made. They reached the wall and used a telescoping ladder to scale it quickly. Jake went first, weapon ready, expecting to find guards waiting. But the wall was clear, exactly as Falcon had predicted. They dropped into the compound and moved swiftly toward the northwest building. The door was unlocked, another detail Falcon had provided. Inside, the building was dark and smelled of cooking spices and gun oil. Second floor, third door on the left, Falcon whispered in Jake's ear. Your target is inside. 1 guard outside the door, 2 more in the room with the target. Jake hand-signaled the information to his team. They moved up the stairs like ghosts, their training taking over. The guard outside the door was looking toward the window, distracted by the sounds of fighting outside. He never saw the SEAL who neutralized him silently. Jake stacked his team on the door. 3 enemies inside, unknown layout, target that needed to be taken alive if possible. These were the moments where years of training met seconds of action. Diversion team withdrawing, Martinez reported on the radio. Guard forces pursuing, Falcon added. Main team, you now have approximately 2 minutes before they realize the diversion was a feint and return to the compound. Execute your objective, Jake nodded to his breacher. The door exploded inward and the SEALs poured into the room. The 2 guards inside reacted quickly, reaching for weapons, but they were not quick enough. Jake's team neutralized both threats in seconds, their suppressed weapons making quiet coughing sounds. The target sat on a cushion in the corner of the room, hands raised. He was older than his photos suggested, with a gray beard and sharp, intelligent eyes. This was Ahmad Massoud, a Taliban commander responsible for coordinating attacks across 3 provinces. Secure him, Jake ordered. His men moved forward with zip ties and a hood. Ground team, you need to move. Falcon's voice carried a new urgency. The guards are returning faster than projected. Someone smart is in charge out there and they figured out the diversion quicker than anticipated. You have 90 seconds to exit the compound or you will be pinned down. Jake's mind raced. They had the target, but getting out was going to be harder than getting in. The element of surprise was gone and the enemy was now fully alert and angry. Give me an exit route, Jake demanded. North wall, same point you entered, Falcon responded. But you are going to have company. 3 hostiles are moving to block that position. You will need to go through them. Can we go another way? Negative. All other routes are already blocked or will be before you can reach them. North wall is your only option. Jake grabbed the target by the arm and pulled him to his feet. Let us move double time. They ran through the building and out into the compound. Immediately, gunfire erupted from their left. Rounds sparked off the wall near Jake's head. His team returned fire, laying down suppressive shots as they rushed toward the north wall. 3 hostiles at your exit point moving to intercept, Falcon reported. Range 50 meters and closing. They have a machine gun. A machine gun changed everything. If that weapon set up with a good field of fire, The SEALs would be cut to pieces trying to scale the wall. "I need that gun suppressed," Jake said through gritted teeth. "Already on it," Falcon replied. Then to Jake's shock, he heard her voice change channels. She was speaking directly to someone else now. Someone he could not hear. "Overwatch, this is Falcon. Authorization code Tango 7 Delta Romeo. Requesting immediate fire mission." Jake's eyes went wide. Falcon had not just been watching them through drones and satellites. She had combat assets positioned to support them. 5 seconds later, the night lit up with tracer fire. A heavy machine gun, positioned somewhere Jake could not see, opened up on the hostiles moving to block their escape. The enemy fighters scattered, their own machine gun abandoned as they sought cover. "Your exit is clear," Falcon said, her voice calm again. 10 seconds, then they will recover and regroup." The SEALs reached the wall and practically threw their prisoner over it. They followed quickly, and Jake was the last one up and over. Bullets snapped through the air where he had been standing a moment before. "Rally point Alpha." "Move," Jake commanded. They ran through the darkness, the target stumbling between two SEALs who half carried, half dragged him along. Behind them, the compound was in chaos with guards shouting and lights scanning the surrounding area. "Diversion team is at the rally point," Martinez reported. "Main team?" 2 minutes out, Jake responded. They reached the rally point, a cluster of rocks that provided cover and concealment. Martinez and his team were already there, weapons trained on possible approach routes. "Exfil is inbound," Falcon said. "Helicopter will be on station in 6 minutes. Sit tight and stay quiet. Enemy is searching, but they are moving away from your position." The team formed a defensive perimeter, each man watching a sector, the target sitting in the center with his hands bound and hood secure. The adrenaline was starting to fade now, replaced by the familiar exhaustion that came after high-intensity operations. Jake allowed himself a small smile. They had pulled it off against odds that should have been impossible, with a plan that seemed crazy but had worked perfectly. "Falcon," he said quietly into his radio. "Good call on the diversion tactic. That was solid work." "Thank you, Lieutenant Commander," came the reply. "But we are not home yet. Stay alert." The 6 minutes waiting for extraction felt like 6 hours. Jake's team maintained their defensive positions while Falcon continued providing updates on enemy movements. The Taliban fighters were searching in an expanding pattern from the compound, but they were moving in the wrong direction, apparently convinced the attackers had escaped to the west. "Helicopter inbound 30 seconds, Falcon announced. "Pop green smoke on my mark." Jake readied the smoke grenade. His men tensed, knowing that the smoke would give away their position to any enemy within visual range. But the helicopter needed a clear landing zone marker in the darkness. "Mark," Falcon said. Jake released the smoke, and green clouds billowed up into the night sky. The sound of rotor blades grew louder, and then the Black Hawk was descending toward them, its crew chief scanning for threats with mounted machine guns. "Enemy patrol has spotted the smoke," Falcon reported, her voice tight. "They are redirecting approximately 400 meters south of your position and closing fast. You have maybe 90 seconds. The helicopter touched down and the team moved quickly. They loaded the prisoner first, then piled in themselves. Jake was the last aboard, and even as he grabbed for a handhold, he could see muzzle flashes in the distance. Bullets began snapping through the air around them, taking fire. The pilot reported calmly. "Going up." The helicopter lifted off and the crew chiefs returned fire toward the enemy positions below. Jake watched the ground fall away beneath them, the green smoke dispersing in the rotor wash, and the tiny figures of Taliban fighters growing smaller. "Ground team, you are clear of the engagement area," Falcon said. "Nice work down there." That was textbook execution under difficult circumstances. "Could not have done it without your guidance," Jake admitted, surprising himself with how much he meant it. The flight back to base took 40 minutes. During that time, Jake and his team began the process of coming down from combat readiness. They checked their gear, inventoried ammunition, and made sure everyone was uninjured. The prisoner sat quietly, secured between two SEALs, his hood still in place. When they landed at the forward operating base, a reception team was waiting. Intelligence officers took custody of the prisoner, while a medical team checked over the SEALs for any injuries that might have gone unnoticed during the operation. Jake was exhausted but satisfied. The mission had been a success. As he walked toward the operations center to begin the debriefing process, his radio crackled one more time. "Lieutenant Commander Morrison, this is Falcon." Excellent work tonight. Get some rest. I will see you at the debrief in 6 hours. Jake stopped walking. You will be at the debrief? In person? Affirmative. I believe it is time we met face to face. 6 hours later, Jake entered the briefing room feeling surprisingly refreshed despite only 4 hours of sleep. His team filed in behind him, each man curious to finally see the person who had guided them so expertly through a mission that should have been impossible. Captain Richards was already there, along with several intelligence officers and some personnel Jake did not recognize. But there was no sign of Falcon. They waited another 5 minutes, making small talk and reviewing mission footage that had been captured by their helmet cameras. Then the door opened and a woman walked in. She was average height with dark hair pulled back in a tight bun and sharp, observant eyes. She wore standard combat fatigues without insignia, and she moved with the controlled efficiency of someone who had spent years in operational environments. What caught Jake's attention immediately was the scarring on her left hand and forearm, visible below her rolled-up sleeve, burn scars that looked old but extensive. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice instantly recognizable as the one that had guided them through the mission. "I am Falcon. My real name is Sarah Chen, and for the next few weeks I will be your guardian angel on every mission you run in this sector." The room was silent. Jake studied her, reassessing everything he thought he knew. Sarah Chen looked to be in her mid-30s, and there was something in her bearing that spoke of hard-earned experience and authority that did not require a raised voice. "Before we begin the formal debrief," Sarah continued, "I want to address what I know some of you are thinking. Yes, I am a woman. Yes, I will be directing your combat operations. And yes, I have the qualifications and experience to do so. If any of you have a problem with that, now is the time to speak up, and we will find you a transfer to another unit." She paused, looking at each man in turn. No one spoke. Even Derek, who Jake knew harbored reservations about women in combat roles, remained silent. The mission results spoke louder than any prejudice. "Good," Sarah said with a slight smile. "Now let us talk about what went right last night, what went wrong, and how we can improve for next time." The debrief lasted 3 hours. Sarah walked them through every decision, every tactical choice, and every moment where things could have gone differently. She praised what worked and critically analyzed what did not. What impressed Jake most was her willingness to accept responsibility for the things that had not been perfect. "The intelligence about enemy force strength was wrong," she admitted. "That is on me and my team. We should have had better reconnaissance before sending you in. The fact that you adapted and succeeded despite that failure is a credit to your training and decision-making." As the debrief concluded, Sarah approached Jake privately. "Lieutenant Commander, a moment of your time?" They walked out into the hallway away from the others. Sarah leaned against the wall and studied him for a moment before speaking. "You trusted me last night," she said, "when I told you to change your route, to split your team, to do things that contradicted your training and instincts." Why? Jake thought about the question. "Because you knew what you were talking about. Every piece of information you gave us was accurate. Every prediction you made came true. Results matter more than protocol." Sarah nodded slowly. "I respect that. A lot of team leaders would not have been so flexible. Their ego would not allow them to take direction from someone they had never met, especially someone who was not physically present on the battlefield." "You served," Jake said. It was not a question. "Delta Force," Sarah confirmed. 8 years as an operator. I was one of the first women to complete the selection course and be assigned to an operational team." Jake's eyebrows rose. Delta Force was among the most elite units in the military, with a selection process that broke most candidates regardless of gender. If Sarah had not only completed it but served for 8 years, she was exceptional. "What happened?" Jake asked, gesturing to the scars on her arm. Sarah's expression hardened slightly. "Bad intelligence, just like last night. We went into a compound in Syria that was supposed to have minimal security. Instead, it was a trap. ID took out our lead vehicle and I was in it. Lost 3 team members that day. Spent the next year in recovery, and by the time I was medically cleared, the damage to my arm meant I could not meet the physical standards for continued operational duty. So you became a handler. I became someone who makes sure other teams get better intelligence than we had that day," Sarah corrected. "I make sure operators like you have every advantage, every piece of information, every tactical option that might keep you alive. Because I know what it is like to go into a situation blind and pay the price. Jake understood now. Falcon was not just a call sign. It was a mission statement. Sarah watched over teams like a falcon watches the ground from above, seeing everything, missing nothing, protecting those below. The name, Jake said. Falcon, how did you get it? Sarah smiled, but there was something dangerous in that smile. You will find out soon enough. We have another mission tomorrow night, and this one is going to be considerably more complicated than last night's operation. Get your team rested and ready. We brief at 2000 hours. She walked away, leaving Jake standing in the hallway with more questions than answers. But one thing was certain. He was glad Falcon was on their side. The next day passed in a blur of equipment maintenance, briefings, and preparation. When the team assembled that evening for the mission brief, the atmosphere was different from before. There was no skepticism about Falcon now, no jokes about desk officers or politically connected handlers. They had seen her work, and they knew she was the real deal. Sarah stood at the front of the briefing room with Captain Richards beside her. Behind them, a screen displayed satellite imagery of a mountainous region along the Afghan-Pakistan border. Tonight's objective is more complex, Sarah began. We have intelligence that a meeting is taking place between 3 high-value targets in a remote compound. This is a rare opportunity to remove significant enemy leadership in a single strike, but the location is problematic. She clicked to the next slide, which showed the compound nestled in a narrow valley surrounded by steep terrain. The compound is only accessible by 2 routes. Both are easily defended, and both require traveling through areas where ambush is not just possible but likely. Enemy forces in this region have been actively hunting for special operations teams, and they have set up an extensive early warning network. Derek raised his hand. So how do we get in without triggering that network? Sarah's smile returned, that same dangerous expression Jake had seen before. We do not avoid it. We use it. The briefing room fell silent as every operator tried to process what Sarah had just said. Using the enemy's early warning network instead of avoiding it made no tactical sense on the surface. Jake leaned forward, his curiosity overriding his concern. Explain, Captain Richards said, giving voice to what everyone was thinking. Sarah clicked to a new slide showing a detailed map with red markers scattered throughout the valley approaches. These markers represent enemy observation posts. They are expecting us to try sneaking past them. What they are not expecting is for us to move openly, because no special operations team would be that foolish. Because it would be suicide, Martinez said from the back of the room. It would be if you were actually walking into that valley, Sarah agreed. But you are not going to be in that valley. Not the main team, anyway. She pulled up another map, this one showing a ridgeline that ran parallel to the valley. There is a route along this ridge that provides concealment and a direct line of sight to the compound. It is steep, it is dangerous, and it requires technical climbing skills. But it is completely outside the enemy's observation network because they assume no one would attempt it. Jake studied the route. She was right that it looked dangerous. The terrain was nearly vertical in some places, and one slip would mean a fatal fall. But it would put them above the compound with a perfect tactical advantage. So what is the purpose of moving openly in the valley if we are not actually going that way? One of the other SEALs asked. Deception, Sarah explained. We insert a small team into the valley at dusk, moving with just enough noise and visibility to trigger the enemy's watchers. They report to the compound that American forces are approaching. The targets at the compound have 2 choices, run or fight. Based on personality profiles, we believe they will choose to run, because these are commanders, not frontline fighters. And when they run, Jake prompted, seeing where this was going. When they run, they will use one of 2 evacuation routes we have identified. Both routes take them through narrow passes where they become vulnerable. Meanwhile, your team will already be in position on the ridge with a clear view of everything. You can either engage the targets as they flee, or if they choose to stay and fight, you have high ground advantage for a direct assault on the compound. Captain Richards nodded slowly. It is a sound plan, but that ridge insertion is going to be extremely difficult. We are talking about a technical climb in darkness with full combat load, which is why I will be going with them, Sarah said calmly. The room erupted in surprised murmurs. Jake stared at her, trying to understand what she had just volunteered for. Handlers did not go on missions. They stayed in operations centers, safely removed from the combat zone, providing guidance through technology and communication. The idea of a handler physically accompanying a SEAL team into enemy territory was unheard of. Absolutely not, Richard said immediately. Your value is in coordination and intelligence, not direct action. We can assign one of our combat controllers to— With respect, Captain, no you cannot, Sarah interrupted. The technical climbing required for this route is extremely specialized. I have the experience, I know the route from studying the terrain for the past week, and I have the tactical knowledge to make real-time decisions if the situation changes. Your combat controllers are excellent at what they do, but none of them have the climbing background required for this particular mission. Richards looked like he wanted to argue further, but Sarah cut him off with a look that suggested the decision was not up for debate. I have already cleared this with JSOC Command. The authorization came through an hour ago. I am going. Jake caught Derek's eye across the room. His teammate looked as surprised as Jake felt, but there was also a grudging respect in his expression. Whatever doubts Derek had harbored about women in combat, Sarah was systematically dismantling them through sheer competence and bravery. The briefing continued for another 2 hours, covering every detail of the operation. Sarah outlined contingencies for various scenarios, identified potential complications, and provided detailed intelligence on enemy forces in the area. By the time they finished, Jake felt as prepared as he had ever been for a mission. As the team dispersed to prepare their gear, Sarah approached Jake again. I know what you are thinking, she said. You are wondering if I will slow you down, if I can keep up with your team on that climb. The thought crossed my mind, Jake admitted. No offense, but none taken. Here is what you need to know. Before I joined Delta, I was a competitive mountaineer. I have summited peaks on 4 continents, including a successful Everest expedition. The scars on my arm have not affected my climbing ability. If anything, the physical therapy made my grip strength better than before. She pulled out her phone and showed Jake a series of photos. They showed a younger Sarah at various mountain peaks, grinning despite obvious exhaustion, surrounded by spectacular views. The last photo showed her scaling a sheer cliff face, moving with the confidence and grace of someone completely comfortable in a vertical environment. I will keep up, Sarah said simply. That is not the concern you should have. Then what should I be concerned about? Jake asked. Whether your team can keep up with me? Sarah replied with a slight smile before walking away. The mission launched at dusk the following day. The deception team, led by Martinez, inserted into the valley via helicopter and immediately began moving toward the compound with deliberate visibility. Jake watched from the other helicopter as it climbed higher into the mountains, circling around to approach the ridgeline from the opposite side. Sarah sat across from him, her gear expertly arranged and her expression calm. She had insisted on carrying the same combat load as the rest of the team, refusing any concessions to her handler status or the injuries she had sustained years earlier. Looking at her now, Jake could see the operator she had been before the bombing in Syria. The helicopter brought them as close to the ridgeline as possible, hovering near a relatively flat area that would serve as their insertion point. The team fast roped down, and Sarah went third in the lineup, her descent smooth and controlled. When everyone was on the ground, the helicopter banked away, disappearing into the darkening sky. All right, Falcon, Jake said, using her call sign out of habit. You have got the lead on the climb. Show us this route you have planned. Sarah moved to the edge of the flat area where the cliff face began. She pulled out climbing gear and began setting up the initial anchor points. The first section is about 200 feet of technical climbing. After that, it levels out to steep hiking for about half a mile before we hit another technical section. Total time to reach the observation point overlooking the compound should be approximately 3 hours. 3 hours? Chen said. That is cutting it close to when the targets are supposed to arrive at the compound. Which is why we need to move efficiently, Sarah replied. Everyone check your gear. Make sure nothing is loose that could make noise or get caught on the rock face. We climb in pairs. If anyone falls, your partner arrests the fall. There are no second chances on this route. The team performed their gear checks in silence, the weight of what they were about to attempt settling over them. Jake had done some climbing during his training, but nothing like what Sarah was describing. This was not a training exercise with safety officers and backup systems. This was a sheer mountain face in hostile territory in the dark with full combat gear. Sarah clipped into the first rope and began climbing. Even in the dim light, Jake could see the confidence in her movements. She found handholds that seemed invisible, positioned her feet with precision, and moved up the rock face like she was walking upstairs. Every few meters she would pause to set protection points, securing the rope so that if anyone fell they would not drop more than a short distance. Jake went second, following the route Sarah had established. The rock was rough under his gloves and the weight of his gear kept trying to pull him backward. His arms burned within minutes and sweat ran down his face despite the cool mountain air. Above him, Sarah continued climbing steadily, never seeming to struggle or slow down. They reached the first ledge after 40 minutes of climbing. Jake pulled himself up and over the edge, his muscles screaming in protest. The rest of the team followed, each man looking exhausted from the effort. Only Sarah seemed relatively fresh, already coiling rope and preparing for the next section. That was the easy part, she said, and Jake could not tell if she was joking. The next section was indeed harder. The rock face was more vertical with fewer obvious handholds. Sarah led them through it with the same calm competence, but now Jake could hear the strain in her breathing. She was human after all, and the climb was taking its toll on her as well. But she never complained, never asked for a break, never showed any sign that the old injuries to her arm were causing her problems. They reached the steep hiking section with about 90 minutes gone. The team paused for water and to check in with Martinez's deception team in the valley below. Deception team has been spotted, Martinez reported over the radio. Enemy observers are tracking our movement. We are about 15 minutes from the compound. Copy that, Jake responded.
Keep them focused on you.
We are approximately 90 minutes from our observation position. They continued climbing, and now the terrain became a mixture of technical sections and steep scrambling. Sarah maintained the lead, choosing routes that balanced speed with safety. Several times, Jake saw her reject what looked like an easier path in favor of a more difficult one, and each time he understood why moments later when he saw the reason: loose rock, unstable footing, or exposure to potential observation from below. The woman was not just a skilled climber. She was a tactical thinker who understood how to move through enemy territory without being detected. Every decision she made served multiple purposes, and Jake found himself learning from her with each step. They were an hour into the steep section when disaster nearly struck. Chen, climbing about 20 feet below Jake, reached for a handhold that looked solid. The rock broke away in his hand and suddenly he was falling backward, arms windmilling as he tried to catch himself. "Falling!" Chen shouted, the warning every climber dreads hearing. The rope went taut as Chen's partner Stevens arrested the fall. Chen swung hard into the rock face, the impact audible even over the sound of the wind. He hung there for a moment, stunned, then slowly got his feet back under him. "I am okay," Chen called up, his voice shaky. "Just got the wind knocked out of me." Sarah descended quickly to check on him. She examined him with practiced efficiency, looking for injuries that might not be immediately obvious. "Can you continue?" she asked. Chen nodded. "Yeah, I am good. That was stupid of me. Should have tested the hold first." "The rock up here is unstable," Sarah said, addressing the whole team. "From here on, test every hold before you commit your weight to it. Better to be slow than dead." They continued more carefully now, the near accident a reminder of how dangerous their situation was. Jake checked his watch and did the math. They were behind schedule, but not critically so. If they maintained their current pace, they would reach the observation point with about 20 minutes to spare before the targets were expected to arrive at the compound. The final technical section appeared ahead of them, a vertical face that looked impossible to climb in the darkness. Sarah studied it for a moment, then pointed to a crack running up the left side. "We climb the crack," she said. "It is going to require chimney technique. Those of you who do not know what that means, watch me first, then follow exactly what I do." She entered the crack, pressing her back against one side and her feet against the other. Then she began moving upward, using opposing pressure to hold herself in place as she worked her way higher. It looked exhausting, and Jake knew it would require every bit of strength they had left. One by one, the team followed Sarah up the crack. Jake went last, and by the time he was halfway up, his legs were trembling with fatigue. His back felt like it was on fire, and his breathing came in ragged gasps. Above him, he could hear the others struggling as well, grunting with effort as they forced their bodies to continue. Finally, mercifully, Jake reached the top. Strong hands grabbed his gear and hauled him over the edge. He lay on his back for a moment, staring up at the stars and wondering how his legs were still attached to his body. On your feet, Lieutenant Commander, Sarah said, and there was steel in her voice now. We are not done yet. We still have half a mile to the observation point, and we have 15 minutes to get there. Jake groaned but forced himself up. The rest of the team looked equally destroyed, but they all got moving. The route was relatively flat now, crossing along the ridgeline with the compound visible far below them. Sarah set a punishing pace, and somehow they all kept up. They reached the observation point with 3 minutes to spare. Sarah immediately set up her equipment, pulling out tablets and communication gear that seemed far too sophisticated for a handler in the field. Jake realized she had essentially brought a mobile operations center with her, packed into a backpack she had carried up several hundred feet of vertical rock. Deception team, what is your status? Sarah asked over the radio. We are in position at the rally point, Martinez responded. We were engaged briefly by guards from the compound, but withdrew before they could get a clear look at our numbers. Best we can tell, they think we were a small patrol that got spooked. Perfect, Sarah said. Stay hidden and wait for further orders. Main team is now in overwatch position. Jake moved to the edge of the observation point and looked down at the compound through his scope. The buildings were about 800 meters below and slightly to the east. He could see guards moving around the perimeter, more alert now after Martinez's team had probed their defenses. Any sign of the targets? Jake asked. Negative, Sarah replied, studying her tablet. But we have vehicles approaching from the north. 2 trucks, multiple heat signatures. This could be them arriving now. The team watched as the vehicles entered the compound. Several men got out, and even from this distance, Jake could see they carried themselves with authority, rather than the nervous energy of common fighters. Facial recognition is running, Sarah said quietly. She waited for several seconds, then nodded. Confirmed. We have all 3 targets in the compound. Mission is a go. Jake felt his heart rate increase. This was it. They had successfully climbed into position. The targets had walked into the trap, and now they just needed to wait for the enemy to make their move. Deception team, Sarah said into the radio. Initiate phase 2. Make them think you are preparing for an assault. Far below in the valley, Jake saw muzzle flashes as Martinez's team began firing toward the compound from long range. They were deliberately missing, the point being to create pressure and fear rather than cause casualties. The compound erupted into activity, guards rushing to defensive positions, lights coming on, and people shouting orders. They are panicking, Sarah observed with satisfaction. Now we wait to see if they run or if they dig in to fight. The answer came within 5 minutes. The 2 trucks that had brought the targets started their engines. Men piled into the vehicles, including the 3 high-value targets. The compound gates opened, and the trucks roared out, heading toward the eastern pass that Sarah had predicted they would use. They are running, Jake confirmed, heading toward Pass Echo. I see them, Sarah said, tracking the vehicles on her tablet. They will reach the narrowest point of the pass in approximately 3 minutes. That is your engagement window. Wind is currently 5 miles per hour from the west. Range to impact point will be approximately 900 meters. You have 1 chance to take this shot before they reach cover on the far side. Jake positioned himself behind his rifle, settling into a stable shooting position. Beside him, 2 other SEALs with designated marksman rifles did the same. The trucks would pass through a section of the pass where they would be exposed for perhaps 30 seconds. In that window, they needed to stop both vehicles and confirm kills on 3 specific targets. Targets will be in the kill zone in 90 seconds, Sarah said, her voice absolutely calm. Breathe, relax, and remember your training. You have got this. Jake controlled his breathing, slowing his heart rate through sheer force of will. 900 meters was a difficult shot under the best circumstances. At night, from an elevated position, with targets moving in vehicles on rough terrain, it bordered on impossible. But impossible was what SEALs trained for. 60 seconds, Sarah announced. First truck is carrying target Alpha in the passenger seat. Second truck has targets Bravo and Charlie in the cargo bed. Priority is Alpha, then Bravo, then Charlie. Jake adjusted his scope, compensating for the wind and the angle. Beside him, Chen and Stevens made their own calculations. They had worked together long enough that words were unnecessary. Each man knew his role, knew his target, and knew what failure would mean. 30 seconds, Sarah said. First truck entering the kill zone now. Jake could see the lead truck through his scope now, bouncing over the rough road. The passenger window was down, and he could just make out a figure inside. His crosshairs settled on the target, tracking the movement, predicting where the truck would be in the fraction of a second it would take for his bullet to travel 900 meters. 10 seconds. Wind holding steady. You are clear to engage. Jake's finger moved to the trigger. He exhaled slowly, finding that perfect moment between heartbeats when the body is completely still. The world narrowed to just the crosshairs, the target, and the squeeze of the trigger. The rifle kicked against his shoulder. Through the scope, Jake saw the passenger window of the lead truck explode. The truck swerved violently, the driver losing control as the passenger slumped forward. The vehicle careened off the road and slammed into a boulder, steam rising from the destroyed engine. Chen and Stevens fired almost simultaneously. Their targets were in the bed of the second truck, and hitting moving targets in an open vehicle at this range required perfect timing and skill. Both shots found their marks. The two men in the truck bed jerked and fell. All three targets down, Sarah confirmed, studying her thermal imaging. But we have a problem. Survivors from both vehicles are taking defensive positions. They are calling for reinforcements, and we have approximately 10 minutes before additional enemy forces arrive from the compound. Jake assessed the situation quickly. They had accomplished the primary objective. All three high-value targets were neutralized. But now they were exposed on this ridge with an alerted enemy force below them, and reinforcements coming. Getting down from this position would be even more dangerous than climbing up had been. What are our options? Jake asked Sarah. She was already working the problem, her fingers flying over her tablet as she pulled up maps and coordinated with other assets. The deception team cannot reach us in time, and trying to climb down the way we came up with an active enemy force hunting for us would be suicide. We need another option. Helicopter extraction? Stevens suggested. Negative, Sarah replied. The ridge is too narrow and exposed. Any helicopter trying to hover here would be an easy target, and we do not have the air superiority to risk losing an aircraft. Jake looked around at the terrain. They were trapped on a narrow ridge with steep drops on both sides, an angry enemy force below and reinforcements arriving soon. It was the kind of tactical nightmare that usually ended badly. There, Sarah said suddenly, pointing to her tablet. 2 kilometers northeast, there is a wider plateau that can support helicopter landing. If we can reach it before the enemy cuts us off, we can extract safely. 2 kilometers of ridge running in the dark with enemy forces pursuing us, Derek said. That is going to be close. It is our only option, Sarah replied. I am calling for emergency extraction now. The helicopter will be on station in 20 minutes. We need to be at that plateau when it arrives, or we will miss our window. She got on the radio, speaking rapidly to coordinate the extraction. Jake could hear the tension in her voice now, the first time she had shown anything other than complete calm. This was the moment where plans met reality, and even the best planning could not account for every variable. All stations, this is Falcon, Sarah transmitted. Main team is relocating to extraction point Sierra. Deception team, create a distraction at the compound to slow enemy reinforcements. Air support, I need you to lay down suppressive fire on any enemy forces attempting to follow main team's route. The responses came back quickly, everyone acknowledging their roles. Jake felt a surge of respect for how Sarah was coordinating multiple elements, while simultaneously preparing to run for her life along a dangerous ridge in the dark. Let us move, Sarah said, already packing her equipment. Travel light and travel fast. Leave anything that is not essential. The team shed weight quickly, keeping only weapons, ammunition, and critical gear. Then they were running, following Sarah as she led them along the ridge at a pace that should have been impossible given how exhausted they all were. But fear and adrenaline were powerful motivators, and the sound of gunfire from below reminded them what would happen if they were caught. The ridge was treacherous. In places it narrowed to barely 2 feet wide with sheer drops on both sides. One misstep would mean a fatal fall hundreds of feet down. But Sarah moved with confidence, never hesitating, choosing the safest path by instinct more than sight. Behind them, Jake could hear the enemy forces organizing. Flashlights swept the mountainside as they searched for the Americans who had killed their commanders. It would not take them long to figure out where the shots had come from, and then the race would truly begin. They had covered about half a kilometer when the first bullet started snapping past them. The enemy had spotted them on the ridge and were firing from below. The shots were wildly inaccurate at this range and angle, but it only took one lucky bullet to end a life. Keep moving, Sarah shouted. Do not stop, do not return fire. Speed is our only defense. Jake ran harder, his lungs burning and his legs threatening to give out. The ridge seemed endless. stretching ahead into darkness with no sign of the plateau Sarah had promised. He began to wonder if they would make it, if they had pushed their luck too far this time. Then Sarah stopped so suddenly that Jake almost ran into her. She was standing at the edge of a gap in the ridge, a space about 8 feet wide where the rock had fallen away at some point. On the far side, the ridge continued toward what looked like wider ground. The plateau. "We have to jump," Sarah said, stating the obvious. "One at a time. Do not overthink it, just commit and go." She took a running start and leaped across the gap, landing safely on the far side and rolling to absorb the impact. "Come on," she shouted back. One by one, the SEALs jumped. Chen went first, clearing the gap easily. Stevens followed, then Derek. Jake watched as each man made the leap, his stomach churning with anxiety. Heights had never been his favorite thing, and jumping across an 8-foot gap with a several hundred-foot drop below was exactly the kind of situation that featured in his nightmares. He was the last one left on this side. Behind him, the enemy forces were getting closer. He could hear them shouting to each other, could see their lights getting brighter. There was no time to think about it anymore. Jake ran at the gap and jumped. For a moment, he was airborne, suspended between 2 pieces of rock with nothing but air beneath him. Then his boots hit solid ground on the far side and he was stumbling forward, Sarah catching his arm to steady him. "Nice jump," she said with a quick smile. "Now let us finish this." The plateau was just ahead, a flat area about 50 meters across. Sarah led them to the center and immediately began setting up lights to mark the landing zone for the helicopter. Jake and his team formed a defensive perimeter, weapons trained on the route they had just traveled. "Extraction bird is 5 minutes out," Sarah reported. "We just need to hold this position for 5 more minutes." Those 5 minutes felt eternal. The enemy forces reached the gap in the ridge and began trying to find a way across. Some attempted to jump it, but the distance was too far for them without a running start from their direction. Others began rappelling down one side with the obvious intention of climbing back up the other. "Contact," Derek called out, firing controlled bursts at enemies trying to cross the gap. The other SEALs joined in, laying down suppressive fire that forced the enemy to take cover. Then Jake heard the most beautiful sound in the world, helicopter rotor blades cutting through the night air. The Black Hawk came in fast and low, its crew chiefs already firing at enemy positions as it approached. The helicopter touched down on the plateau, and Sarah waved the team forward. "Go, go, go!" she shouted over the roar of the engines. The SEALs ran for the helicopter, climbing aboard as the pilots kept the rotors spinning. Jake counted heads, making sure everyone was accounted for. Chen, Stevens, Derek, Martinez's team had somehow made it to the extraction point too. Sarah must have coordinated that while they were running. Everyone was present, everyone except Sarah. Jake looked back and saw her still standing on the plateau, firing her rifle at the enemy forces, providing cover fire as the team boarded. A bullet struck the ground near her feet, then another hit her pack. "Falcon," Jake shouted. "Get on the bird." Sarah fired one more burst, then turned and sprinted for the helicopter. Jake reached out and grabbed her hand, pulling her aboard as the pilot increased power. The helicopter lifted off, bullets sparking off the armored hull as they climbed away from the plateau. Sarah collapsed onto the deck of the helicopter, breathing hard, her face covered in sweat and dirt. She looked up at Jake and gave him a tired smile. "That was closer than I would have liked," she said, her voice barely audible over the engine noise. "You could have gotten on first," Jake pointed out. "You coordinated the extraction. You could have taken the first seat." "I am responsible for getting you home safely," Sarah replied. "That means I am the last one on and the first one off. Always." Jake helped her into a seat and handed her a bottle of water. Around them, the rest of the team was coming down from the adrenaline high, checking themselves for injuries and beginning to process what they had just survived. "Where did you learn to lead like that?" Jake asked Sarah quietly. That was not just combat experience. That was something more. Sarah took a long drink of water before answering. "You asked me before how I got the call sign Falcon," she said. "I will tell you now. When I was in Delta, my specialty was high-altitude reconnaissance. I would insert into areas days before the main team, climb to observation positions that seemed impossible, and provide overwatch for the entire mission. My teammates said I was like a falcon, sitting high above the battlefield, seeing everything, diving in to protect them when danger appeared. She looked out the helicopter door at the mountains falling away below them. After I got injured, I thought that part of my life was over. But someone convinced me that I could still be a Falcon, just in a different way. So I learned to do from an operations center what I used to do from a mountainside. Tonight was the first time I combined both roles. It felt good to be back in the field. You saved our lives tonight, Jake said seriously. Multiple times. That climb, the route selection, the extraction plan, all of it. We would not have made it without you. That is the job, Sarah replied. But Jake could see the pride in her eyes. And speaking of the job, we have 3 more missions scheduled this month. So get some rest, Lieutenant Commander, because next time is going to be even harder. Jake laughed despite his exhaustion. He believed her. With Falcon watching over them, he had no doubt that they would face impossible situations and somehow come through on the other side. Because that was what she did. That was what they all did. The helicopter flew through the night, carrying them back to base, back to safety, back to prepare for the next mission. And somewhere high above, real Falcons circled on thermal currents, hunting and watching, just like the woman who shared their name. 3 weeks had passed since the ridge extraction, and Jake's team had completed 4 more missions with Sarah coordinating every detail. Each operation had been successful. Each one had pushed them to their limits, and each one had proven that Falcon was more than just a handler. She was part of the team now, even if she spent most missions in the operations center rather than in the field. But tonight was different. Tonight's mission had gone wrong from the very beginning. The intelligence had seemed solid. A weapons cache in a remote village, minimal security, a quick in-and-out operation. But when Jake's team arrived, they found the village crawling with enemy fighters. Someone had leaked the mission details, and what should have been a simple raid had turned into a full-scale firefight. "Falcon, we are pinned down," Jake shouted into his radio over the sound of gunfire. His team was trapped in a building on the edge of the village, surrounded by hostile forces and running low on ammunition. "We need options, and we need them fast." There was a long pause on the radio, longer than Sarah usually took to respond. When her voice came through, there was something in her tone that Jake had never heard before. "Fear. Ground team, be advised, we have a serious problem," Sarah said. "I am showing multiple enemy vehicles approaching your position from the north. Technical trucks with heavy weapons. If they reach your location, you will be overwhelmed." Jake looked at his team. They were in bad shape. Stevens had taken a round to his leg and could not run. Chen was down to his last magazine. Derek had a piece of shrapnel embedded in his shoulder but was still fighting. They had no vehicle, no air support available for another 15 minutes, and now they had heavily armed reinforcements bearing down on them. "What are our options?" Jake asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. "There are none," Sarah said quietly. "Every extraction route is blocked. Every defensive position will be overrun once those technical trucks arrive. You are out of time and out of options." The radio fell silent. Jake had never heard Sarah admit defeat before. She always had a plan, always had a solution, always found a way to keep them alive. But now, trapped in this god-forsaken village with an army closing in, even Falcon could not see a way out. "Then we make our stand here," Jake said, resigned to their fate. "We take as many of them with us as we can." "Negative," Sarah replied, and now there was steel in her voice again. "Negative, I am not losing a team. Not today. Not ever." "Falcon, there is no—" Jake started, but she cut him off. "Listen to me very carefully, Lieutenant Commander. I need you to get your team to the roof of that building. Right now. You have maybe 3 minutes before those technical trucks arrive. Get to the roof and wait for my signal." Jake did not understand what Sarah was planning, but he trusted her. He had learned that much over the past month. When Falcon gave an order, you followed it, even when it did not make sense. You heard her, Jake shouted to his team. "Roof now. Chen, help Stevens. Derek, cover our movement." They fought their way up the stairs, leaving the relative safety of the ground floor for the completely exposed roof. Enemy fire followed them, bullets punching through the thin walls and kicking up dust around their feet. Stevens groaned in pain as Chen half carried him up the narrow staircase. They burst onto the roof just as the technical trucks rolled into view at the end of the street. The heavy machine guns mounted on the truck beds swiveled toward the building, and Jake knew they had seconds before those weapons turned the entire structure into rubble. "We are on the roof," Jake transmitted. "Falcon, whatever you are planning, now would be a really good time." "Hold position," Sarah responded. 30 seconds. 30 seconds felt like 30 years. The technical trucks moved closer. The machine guns opened fire, raking the building with heavy-caliber rounds that punched through walls like they were paper. Jake and his team pressed themselves flat against the roof, praying that the gunners could not elevate their weapons high enough to hit them. Then Jake heard it. A sound he recognized instantly, a sound that meant hope. The distinctive roar of a motorcycle engine, powerful and fast, growing louder by the second. A motorcycle burst around the corner at the far end of the street, moving at incredible speed. The rider was dressed in black combat gear, a helmet covering their face. But Jake knew who it was even before the motorcycle jumped a set of stairs and went airborne, landing in the middle of the street between the technical trucks and Jake's building. The rider threw something at the lead truck, a grenade that exploded on impact, destroying the vehicle's front tire and causing it to swerve wildly. Then the motorcycle accelerated again, weaving between the remaining trucks, and Jake saw the rider tossing more grenades with impossible accuracy, targeting fuel tanks and weapon mounts. Explosions lit up the street. The technical trucks careened out of control or stopped dead as their weapons were destroyed. Enemy fighters scattered, trying to get clear of the chaos. And through it all, the motorcycle rider moved like a ghost. Impossibly fast, impossibly skilled, causing maximum damage while somehow avoiding the dozens of bullets being fired in her direction. The motorcycle skidded to a stop at the base of Jake's building. The rider looked up at the roof and pulled off her helmet, revealing Sarah's face covered in dirt and sweat but grinning with wild exhilaration. "Need a ride?" she shouted up at them. Where did you? Jake stammered, unable to form a coherent question. "No time," Sarah yelled. "There is a vehicle 2 blocks east. I cleared the route. Get your team there now while the enemy is still disorganized. Move." Jake did not need to be told twice. The team scrambled down from the roof using a drainage pipe on the backside of the building. Sarah covered them, firing her rifle with calm precision at any enemy fighter who tried to pursue. When they reached the ground, she mounted her motorcycle and led them through the narrow streets, taking sharp turns and shortcuts that Jake would never have found on his own. They reached the vehicle Sarah had mentioned, a battered SUV that looked like it had been through a war but still had an engine that purred when Sarah started it. The team piled in, Stevens lying across the back seat while Chen worked to stop the bleeding from his leg wound. Sarah threw the SUV into gear and drove like she was possessed, taking corners at speeds that should have rolled the vehicle, avoiding enemy checkpoints through paths that only someone who had studied the village layout for hours would know. Bullets shattered the rear window and the side mirrors were shot off. But Sarah kept driving, kept them moving, kept them alive. They broke clear of the village and into the open desert just as the helicopter appeared on the horizon. Sarah drove straight toward it, not slowing down until they were practically underneath the aircraft. The helicopter touched down, and the team transferred from the SUV to the aircraft in seconds. Sarah was the last one to board again, and as the helicopter lifted off, Jake finally got a good look at her. She was bleeding from a cut on her forehead. Her gear was torn and scorched from the explosions, and she looked more exhausted than he had ever seen her. "That was insane," Jake said, his own voice shaking with adrenaline. "You rode a motorcycle into an active combat zone by yourself to save us. That was the most reckless, dangerous, completely insane thing I have ever seen anyone do." Sarah leaned back against the helicopter wall and closed her eyes. "That is what Falcons do, Lieutenant Commander. When their family is in danger, they dive. They do not think about the risk. They do not calculate the odds. They just dive fast and hard, and they protect what matters." "Where did you even get a motorcycle?" Derek asked, still trying to process what had happened. "I requisitioned it 3 days ago," Sarah replied, opening her eyes. "When I studied the village layout, I identified this scenario as a possibility. Low probability, but possible. So I prepared for it. There were 3 motorcycles positioned at strategic points around the village, just in case we needed rapid insertion capability. I just had to reach one, which required leaving the operations center and driving to the staging area, but that only took 12 minutes. Jake shook his head in disbelief. "You planned for this? You planned for the mission going completely wrong and you needing to ride in on a motorcycle to save us?" "I plan for everything," Sarah said simply. "That is my job. I told you I would keep you alive, and I meant it. I will always mean it." Captain Richards was waiting when they landed at the base. His expression was thunderous, and Jake knew that Sarah was about to face serious consequences for leaving the operations center and putting herself in danger. Handlers did not do what she had done, It was against protocol, against orders, against every rule in the book. "Captain Chen, a word," Richard said, his voice tight with controlled anger. Sarah climbed out of the helicopter and walked over to him, not flinching from the confrontation she knew was coming. Jake and his team watched from a distance, unable to hear the conversation but able to see Richards gesturing angrily while Sarah stood at attention, taking the reprimand without argument. The conversation lasted 5 minutes. Then Richards turned and walked away, leaving Sarah standing alone on the tarmac. She looked over at Jake's team and gave them a tired smile and a small wave, before heading toward the medical center to get her injuries treated. Jake found her there an hour later. She was sitting on an examination table while a medic stitched the cut on her forehead. Her gear was piled in the corner, and she looked small and vulnerable in a way she never did when she was working. "How bad is it?" Jake asked, referring to the trouble she was in with Richards. "Formal reprimand in my file," Sarah said with a shrug. "No more field operations. I am confined to the operations center for the remainder of my deployment." Could have been worse. Richards was angrier that I was right than that I broke protocol. Turns out he hates admitting that sometimes rules need to be broken. "You saved our lives," Jake said quietly. "Again, we all know that. The whole team knows that." "That is why I am here," Sarah replied. "Not for medals or recognition. Not even for the thrill of it. Though I will not lie and say I did not miss that feeling of being in the field. I am here because people like you go into impossible situations, and someone needs to make sure you come home. That someone is me." The medic finished with the stitches and left them alone. Jake sat down next to Sarah on the examination table. "Why do you do this?" he asked. "Really? After what happened to you in Syria? After losing teammates, after all the trauma and the injuries, why do you keep doing this?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment, staring at her scarred hands. "Because I could not save them," she finally said. "The 3 people who died in that bombing in Syria. I was the senior person in that vehicle. It was my responsibility to keep them safe, and I failed. Every day since then I wake up and I remember their faces. I remember their families at the funerals. I remember the guilt." Tears ran down her face and she did not bother wiping them away. "So I do this because maybe if I keep enough other teams alive, maybe if I prevent enough other disasters, maybe someday the balance will even out. Maybe someday I will have saved more people than I lost. I know it does not work that way. I know it is not rational, but that is why I am here. That is why I will always be here, watching, planning, protecting." Jake put his arm around her shoulders and she leaned against him, letting the exhaustion and emotion pour out. They sat like that for a long time. 2 warriors who had seen too much, lost too much, but who kept going anyway because that was what warriors did. The next morning, Sarah was back in the operations center, coordinating missions and watching over teams just like she had promised. Jake's team had a few days of downtime to recover from their injuries, but they spent most of it visiting Sarah, bringing her coffee, and trading stories about the missions they had survived together. On their last night before Sarah was scheduled to rotate back to the United States, the whole team gathered in the operations center after hours. They presented her with a patch they had designed, a falcon diving from the sky with the words "Guardian Angel" stitched below it. "You earned this," Jake said, handing her the patch. "Every one of us is alive because of you. Every mission we completed, every impossible situation we got out of, every moment when we thought there was no way forward, and you found one anyway. You are not just our handler. You are family." Sarah took the patch, her hands trembling slightly as she examined it. The falcon was beautifully detailed, wings spread wide in a protective stance. She pressed it against her chest right over her heart and looked at each member of the team. "I do not know what to say," she admitted, her voice thick with emotion. "I have worked with a lot of teams over the years, but you all are different. You trusted me when you had no reason to. You followed my guidance even when it seemed crazy. You made me feel like I was still part of something bigger than myself. You will always be part of this team," Martinez said. "Distance does not change that. Wherever we go, whatever missions we run, you will be with us." Derek stepped forward and everyone turned to look at him. He had been the most skeptical about Sarah at the beginning, the one who had doubted that a woman could effectively coordinate combat operations. But his expression now was one of complete respect. "I was wrong about you," Derek said simply. "I judged you before I knew you, and I am sorry for that. You are one of the best operators I have ever worked with, and I have worked with a lot of people who were not half as good as you. Thank you for proving me wrong. Thank you for keeping us alive." Thank you for being exactly who you are." He extended his hand, and Sarah shook it firmly. In that moment, Jake saw the last wall come down. The team was complete, united not by proximity or orders, but by shared experience and mutual respect earned through fire and blood. They spent the next few hours sharing stories and laughing about the close calls they had survived. Sarah told them about other missions she had coordinated, other teams she had watched over, and the lessons she had learned from each one. The SEALs shared their own war stories, including some from before Sarah had joined them, and she listened with the attention of someone who genuinely cared about every detail. As the night grew late and people began to drift off to get some sleep before the morning flight, Jake stayed behind with Sarah. They sat in the quiet operations center, surrounded by screens and maps and all the technology that had helped keep them alive. "What will you do when you get back?" Jake asked. "I mean, after the medical leave and the debriefings and all that?" Sarah smiled. "They want me to train the next generation of handlers, teach them everything I know about coordinating special operations, about tactical decision-making, about how to think 3 steps ahead of the enemy. Apparently, my methods are unconventional enough that they want to make them conventional." "That is good," Jake said. "You have a lot to teach." "Maybe," Sarah agreed. "But I will miss this. I will miss working with teams in real time, making decisions that matter, knowing that I am making a difference right now instead of preparing other people to make a difference later." "You will still be making a difference," Jake assured her. "Every handler you train will save lives. Every technique you teach will help someone survive an impossible situation. You are multiplying your impact, not reducing it." Sarah nodded, accepting his words even if she did not fully believe them yet. "What about you? What is next for the team?" "More missions, I assume," Jake said with a shrug. "We will get a new handler, someone who will have very large shoes to fill. We will adapt like we always do, but it will not be the same without you watching over us." "You will be fine," Sarah said firmly. "You are all excellent operators with good instincts and solid training. You do not need me to hold your hand." "Maybe not," Jake admitted. "But we want you to. You make us better. You push us to think differently, to take chances we might not otherwise take, to trust in plans that seem impossible but somehow work. That is rare. That is special." They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, both lost in their own thoughts. Then Sarah reached into her pocket and pulled out a small object. It was a feather, dark brown with lighter edges, clearly from a bird of prey. "A falcon feather," she explained, handing it to Jake. "I found it during a mission 2 years ago before I met your team. I kept it as a reminder of what I am supposed to be. Someone who watches from above, who sees dangers others miss, who protects from the shadows. I want you to have it." Jake took the feather carefully. "I cannot take this. It is yours." "And now it is yours," Sarah insisted. "Keep it with you on missions. When things get difficult, when you are not sure what to do, look at it and remember that somewhere someone is watching over you. Maybe not me specifically, but the spirit of what we did together. The idea that we can overcome impossible odds when we work together and trust each other." Jake tucked the feather into his vest pocket, right next to his heart. "Thank you, Sarah, for everything. For saving our lives multiple times. For believing in us. For being brave enough to do what needed to be done even when it went against every rule. You are one of the best people I have ever served with." Sarah wiped at her eyes, not bothering to hide the tears anymore. "Right back at you, Lieutenant Commander. Right back at you." The sun was rising over the Afghan mountains when Sarah's transport helicopter arrived. The entire team was there to see her off, standing in formation despite it not being required. As Sarah walked toward the aircraft, she stopped and turned back to face them. She did not salute. Saluting would have been too formal, too distant for what they had shared. Instead, she placed her hand over her heart, right where the falcon patch would eventually be sewn onto her uniform. The team mirrored the gesture, each man placing his hand over his own heart. No words were needed. Everything that mattered had already been said. Sarah climbed aboard the helicopter, and Jake watched it lift off and disappear into the morning sky. For a moment, he thought he saw a real falcon circling overhead, riding the thermal currents as it searched for prey, but when he blinked, it was gone, leaving only the empty sky and the memory of someone extraordinary. 6 months later, Jake received a letter from Sarah. She was stateside now, working at the training facility, teaching new handlers how to do the job that had nearly cost her everything, but had also given her purpose and meaning. She wrote about her students, about the challenges of translating combat experience into classroom lessons, about how much she missed the adrenaline and the immediacy of active operations. But she also wrote about watching her students succeed, about seeing them graduate and deploy to support teams around the world, about knowing that the lessons she taught would save lives even if she never met the people being saved. She was finding peace in that, she wrote. She was learning to let go of the guilt from Syria and accept that she had done enough, saved enough, given enough. The letter ended with a simple line that Jake would remember for the rest of his career. Keep flying high and always watch out for your team. That is what Falcons do. Jake folded the letter carefully and tucked it into his gear alongside the falcon feather. His team was preparing for another mission, another dangerous operation in hostile territory. They had a new handler now, someone competent and professional, but it was not the same. It would never be quite the same. But as the helicopter lifted off and carried them toward another impossible situation, Jake found himself thinking about Sarah's words, about watching from above, about protecting from the shadows, about doing what needed to be done even when it seemed crazy or impossible. He touched the pocket where he kept the feather and he smiled. Somewhere out there in a training facility far from the combat zone, Sarah Chen was creating the next generation of guardians. And here in the field, Jake Morrison and his team were living proof that her methods worked, that her instincts were sound, that her courage was contagious. They called her Falcon because she watched over them from above, because she dove into danger without hesitation when her team was threatened, because she had the vision to see paths forward when everyone else saw only obstacles. They called her Falcon because she embodied everything the name meant: grace, power, vigilance, and an absolute commitment to protecting those under her care. And now, years later, there were dozens of handlers using her techniques, following her example, keeping teams alive across multiple theaters of operation. The legend of Falcon had spread beyond one team, beyond one deployment, beyond one person. It had become a standard, an ideal, a reminder of what was possible when skill met courage, met unwavering dedication. The helicopter banked hard, beginning its descent toward the landing zone. Jake checked his weapons one last time and looked at his team. They were ready. They were always ready, because they had learned from the best, had been protected by the best, had seen firsthand what true excellence looked like. As they jumped from the helicopter into the darkness below, Jake thought he heard the cry of a falcon echoing across the mountains. It was probably just his imagination, probably just the wind or the rotor blades or wishful thinking, but then again, maybe it was not. Maybe somewhere, somehow, Falcon was still watching, still protecting, still diving from the heights to keep her family safe. That was what Falcons did, after all. That was what they would always do, and Jake Morrison, along with everyone who had ever worked with Sarah Chen, would carry that lesson with them for the rest of their lives. They would watch over their own teams with the same dedication she had shown. They would take the impossible chances when necessary. They would never leave anyone behind. Because that was what Falcon had taught them. That was her legacy. And it was a legacy worth honoring, every single day on every single mission until the end.